Hi everyone, this is Cheryl and welcome to my sewing room. I'm going to demonstrate how to make this really gorgeous springtime table runner. This project is a great way for learning some really basic quilting skills. It's one of those weekend projects. In fact, if you're really energized, you can probably make it in a day. So let's get started. You'll need two different fabrics for this table runner. I've identified them as fabric A and B. You'll need 2/3 yard of fabric A. Out of that, you're going to cut 5 9.5-inch squares and 12 2.5-inch squares. Fabric B, you'll need 1/3 yard. Out of that, cut 16 2.5 by 9.5-inch strips. For the back, you're going to need about a yard. Out of that yard, you're going to cut 2 that are 15.5 by 40 inches, stitch them together, and then you're going to cut them down to 60 inches long. Or you can use scraps and create a piece that is 15.5 by 60 inches long. No one's going to see it, so you can use whatever you want on the back. Cotton batting, cut one piece that is 15.5 by 60 inches long. Binding, you're going to need 1/3 yard, cut 4 2.5-inch wide strips. I'm going to demonstrate how to cut out your 9.5-inch squares. You want to leave the fabric folded in half, selvage edges together. Then take this raw edge here and we're going to straighten it out. So you want to pull it past the 0 line here so that you can cut this edge straight. And you also want to take the folded edge and place it on the 1-inch line straight across. And you want to be able to see these lines here so that it's easy to know if your ruler is lined up straight. So go ahead and place the edge of your ruler on that 0 line. Once you have it lined up, then cut the edge straight. Now you're going to move over 9.5 inches. Don't move your fabric. Just move the ruler. Line it up again, straight up and down. Line up your ruler down here as well as up here. Once you have it lined up, then go ahead and cut your first strip out. Now out of this first strip, we'll be able to get 4 9.5-inch squares. So you're going to go over 9.5 inches now, which is going to make it on the 19-inch line. And make sure it's nice and straight. Then cut your second strip. Stack your 2 strips together and make sure they're lined up very good. Place one end on the 1-inch line, pull the selvage edges past the 0 line. Make sure everything is straight. And the first thing we're going to do is cut off these selvage edges. So again, place your ruler on that 1-inch line, 0 line. Make sure it's all lined up good and straight. The more time you take on cutting, the easier it's going to be to put this project together. Cut that selvage edge off. Now go over 9.5 inches. Line up the ruler. Make sure it's nice and straight. And cut. You're going to go over another 9.5 inches, which is going to put you on the 19-inch line on your ruler. Make sure it's lined up and then cut. Now you have plenty of squares for this. So if you want to make the table runner longer, you can, or you can save these blocks for another project. For the fabric A 2.5-inch squares, you want to keep the fabric folded just like you did in the previous demonstration for the 9.5-inch squares. Cut one strip that is 2.5 inches wide. Then cut the selvage edges off. So line up your ruler's line on the edge of the strip and cut that selvage edge off. Then you're going to continue cutting down the strip here, cutting your 2.5 inch squares. So line up your ruler and put the 2.5 inch line on the edge there. Make sure it's also going straight across this way. So use those lines on the ruler to make sure you are correct and lined up. So you've got 2 cut, and then just keep going on down this line till you have 12 2.5 inch squares. To cut out your fabric B 2.5 inch by 9.5 inch strips, again you want to leave that fabric folded, line it up like you saw in the first demonstration for cutting the 9.5 inch squares. You're going to cut 4 strips that are 2.5 inches wide. I've only got 2 stacked here. I wouldn't stack more than 2 strips at a time because the squares, or excuse me, the rectangles might come out a little distorted. So always cut that selvage edge off first. Then you're going to begin cutting 9.5 inch strips. So you want to take your ruler, place the 9.5 inch line down here on the end where you've just cut the selvage edge off. Make sure your ruler is going straight across and cut. Then you would continue down and you're going to do one more cut, placing that 9.5 inch line on there, making sure your ruler is nice and straight across, and cut again. Then take your next 2 strips, line them up, cut the selvage edges off, and cut out 9.5 inch long strips. On each one of your 9.5 inch squares, take 2 of your fabric B 2.5 by 9.5 inch strips, place them on opposite sides of the block and line up the edges, and then stitch 1/4 inch seam. Press your seams. This is very important because it'll come out much nicer. So press it on the back, unfold, and press on top. When you are pressing, you want these 2 seams here to go towards the outside strip. Then take the remainder of your 2.5 by 9.5 inch strips, and on each end you're going to stitch fabric A 2.5 inch squares. So stitch 1/4 inch seam, press the seams on the back, then press them on top, but this time you're going to press the seams going towards the 9.5 inch long strip. Take 2 of these here, and you're going to take one of your 9 inch squares and you're going to stitch these on opposite sides of that square. Always line up your seams and make sure the seam on the bottom is going in the opposite direction than the seam on top. And I like to pin these little seams so that they don't shift while stitching. Then stitch 1/4 inch seam along there. And you're doing that on both sides here. Then after you've done your stitching, press this, then open it up and press on top, and you're stitching the seams away from this block here. So this seam here is going towards the strip, this seam up here is going towards this strip. After you've done that, then you want to take your next block that looks like this, and you're going to bring it front side down on top. Again, line up your seams, make sure the seam on the bottom is going in the opposite direction than the one on top. Pin your seams, pin both so that they don't shift while stitching, and then stitch 1/4 inch along here. After stitching, then press the seam on the back side and then press the seam on top. And this time, you're going to press this seam right here towards this strip. Now take your next piece, it looks like this, and you're going to place it along this edge here. Again, line up everything, match your seams, pin and stitch 1/4 inch. Then you're going to add the next 9.5 inch block on it, and you're going to continue that till you've got all of your pieces stitched together. When you get down to your last block that you're putting on, make sure you finish off the end with the 9.5 inch strip with the 2 squares on each end. Once you have all of your pieces laid out, then you want to place down your fabric for the back, have it front side down. Now remember, if you're not using one solid piece, you're going to piece together scraps and use it on the back. Then place down your cotton batting next, then your table runner face up. When you cut the fabric for the back out and the cotton batting, you want to make it wider and a little longer than the actual table runner. So have it about 1 inch extending out past each side. Since this table runner is about 13 inches wide, then you're going to cut it about 15 inches wide by whatever the length is, and plus a couple of inches. Once you have it all laid out, make sure you smooth all the layers, so you don't want any wrinkles or creases or loose fabric. Just make sure it's all nice and smooth all the way through. Then to prepare this table runner for quilting stitches, you can either use safety pins that you put through all of the layers all the way through, scatter them all over, or because this is so small, you could just use straight pins and scatter those all over. It's really whatever your preference is. Then you're going to do a quilting stitch pattern of your choice. These are just suggested stitching patterns that you do. Now these stitching patterns hold all of the layers of your table runner together. So you can just do straight stitches from one end to the other of the table runner 2 to 3 inches apart. So you would go down one way first, all the way across, then turn and go the other way, all the way across. This is one stitching pattern. You could also do diagonal lines by just starting in the corner and going across your table runner. And then you would turn it and go across the other way. So this is using a straight stitch. This is a serpentine stitch, and this is one I have on my sewing machine. I absolutely love it. I use it all the time for my quilting stitches. The reason why I like this, if you have a hard time stitching a straight line, you'll never know that this is way off. Someone would have to get really close because it's so wavy. So you could do the same thing. Go all the way down the table runner, going across every 2 to 3 inches, then turning the table runner and going across this way. You can also do the diagonal pattern. So you'd start in the corner, going all the way across, then you would turn it and go across the other way. And this is a gorgeous pattern. This is one of my favorite. Now, if you have other quilting stitches on your sewing machine, but you've never used them before, then make sure you practice on some scrap fabric with cotton batting and fabric on the back. Just cut some little pieces and practice to make sure that you like it. Another thing that you're going to need, or I recommend, is a walking foot. This helps to keep the layers of your fabric from shifting. So by keeping everything pinned and using the walking foot, your stitch pattern will probably come out a lot nicer. Now, If you don't have one, you can purchase them on the internet or go to your local sewing machine store and see if they have one available for you. When you're doing your quilting stitches, I recommend you roll the table runner up because you're going to have an easier time controlling it. So just lightly roll it up. Doesn't have to be super, super tight, like this, all the way down. And then when you go to stick it in your sewing machine, you can, for instance, if you're stitching like towards me, you could stitch and unroll as you go along. Then when you're doing the cross stitch, you could also unroll it and move it away from the needle and just keep going out. You'll find it'll be so much easier to control. When you're doing your quilting stitches, I recommend you use a quilting thread. It's a heavier duty thread and the stitching just seems to look a little nicer. You don't have to use it. Now on this particular table runner, I have so many different shades of yellow in it, and I didn't want the quilting stitches to be super bold looking. This is a variegated thread. It goes from light to dark over and over again. So the thread kind of fades in and out. So it has a different kind of look to it. Variegated threads come in all kinds of colors. This is pink and green. And then there's different shades of purple. And then there's also greens. So you can get these in a variety of colors. You can purchase them. I think I got maybe some of these at Joann.com or Joann Fabrics and Crafts. You can go on Amazon and other quilting and sewing supply stores to get your thread. After your quilting stitches are done, now it's time to trim your edges. Like I've already done over here. I've cut the fabric off so it's even with the table runner fabric on top. So place your long ruler along that edge, and it really looks nice if you have one of these long rulers, and go ahead and just begin trimming your edges off. So you would go around all four sides and trim that excess fabric off. Next step is to do the binding. So you're going to need 4 strips of binding. I cut my binding a little wider than probably most people do. I just find it's easier to handle, and I like just a little bit wider binding edge on my table runners. So make sure that you cut these salvage ends off. Now if you're not sure how to cut your strips, just remember how we cut everything in the beginning of the video. Leave your fabric folded, salvage edges together, line it up on your cutting mat, and move over every 2 3/4 inches, cutting out your strips. So now cut off those salvage edges on all 4 strips. Once you get the salvage edges cut off, then you want to start stitching all of these strips together. So bring your front sides together and stitch 1/4 inch along here. Then you're going to press all those seams open. After all your seams are pressed open, then go ahead and fold the binding strip in half and press it all the way down the full length of your strips. To put the binding on, go to one end of your table runner and place the end of the binding somewhere in the middle. Doesn't have to be exact, but somewhere in the middle. Then you're going to go over and you're going to begin placing pins going towards this corner over here. You're going to stitch 3/8 inch. I know some quilters, they like to do 1/4 inch, but like I said, I like mine a little bit thicker. So I'm doing 3/8 inch seam down to this corner. Now when you get to this corner, you're going to stop 3/8 inch away from this edge here of your table runner. Leave your needle down, lift up the presser foot, turn the table runner at a diagonal, and stitch right into the corner of the table runner. Then take the table runner out of the machine, take your binding and pull it straight out like this to where this edge is in alignment with the table runner. It's straight right there. Then hold it down either with your thumb or a finger and fold it over your thumb or finger and put the folded edge right along here. And then place a pin to hold. Then continue pinning all the way down this edge. Then stitch 3/8 of an inch all the way down. And every time you come to a corner, fold your binding like this. When you come around your last corner here, you want to overlap the ends of the binding. So overlap it, and then you're going to cut excess off, and you're going to overlap about 1/2 an inch and cut it off. So get my scissors here and clip it, and I just sort of eyeball it. There we go. Now you're going to open these ends up, and you're going to bring front sides together of these two ends. And fold your table runner because it'll be easier to bring the ends together. So bring those ends together. Go ahead and place pins to hold it. Then stitch 1/4 inch seam along that edge. There's one little trick I like to do before I fold the binding over to the back, is I'll lift up the binding on the front side and just press that seam along there. Then when you go to fold it over to the back, it goes over a lot easier. Now fold the binding over to the back. So have the back side of your table runner up. So here is your seam. You can see the stitch line right here. This folded edge needs to be pulled past this stitch line. So you would pull it over. Now I kind of can feel that it's pulled past. Remember, if it is not pulled past, you're going to have problems later when you begin to stitch from the front, because that stitch has to catch this lower edge on the back. So make sure that you do that. Now, you're going to have this little bump here at the corner. So I want to show you how to do that. Make sure you have a pin on each side of the corner. Take a straight pin. Press down and in, fold over, and pin. That's how easy it is to do those corners. One thing I forgot to mention a little earlier, when you're stitching on your binding, I recommend you leave the walking foot on because it's very thick on this edge now, and it'll just be a lot easier if you use the walking foot. After pinning your edges down, now I've already done my stitching. Your edges are pinned down. You now flip it over to the front, and you're going to start stitching right in here. This is the ditch right here, where two pieces of fabric come together. So you're going to start in the corner and stitch in that ditch all the way across to the other corner. When you get to this corner, leave your needle down, lift up your presser foot, turn the table runner, and continue stitching down this side. Now here's what the corner looks like on the back. Whoops, let me move it over a little bit more there. Now you can see it. So this is the corner on the back, and then of course this is the front. For more table runner project ideas, go to the green screen at the end of this video and click on the links. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click on thumbs up and click on share to share this video with your friends. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click on that red subscribe button down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Don't forget to enter your email address and click on that little bell so that you'll receive email notifications when my latest video has been released. I'm Cheryl, and I'm so glad you came to my sewing room. I'll see you next time, and happy sewing!